Got unwanted pests in your home or business? Call Get Rid Pest Control at 414-368-0696. State licensed and certified with over 20 years experience, Get Rid Pest Control guarantees their work in the removal of common household pests, including mice, rats, ants, roaches, spiders, centipedes, and bedbugs. Humane trapping and removal of larger pests as well. Unmarked vehicles available upon request. 24-hour emergency service available. Call Get Rid Pest Control today for your free estimate. 414-368-0696. If you got it, we'll get it. Good morning. Welcome to the program. Today is Wednesday, December 16th, 2020. So there seems to be an awful lot of concern about the recently rejected on a 9-6 vote, the COPS grant for the city of Milwaukee, which would effectively pay for 30 more police officers on the streets of the city of Milwaukee. And what I want to try and do today, and I wish me luck because this is not going to be easy, is try to apply some much needed context to the COPS grant, putting more police on the street in the city of Milwaukee. How do we afford those police once the grant expires? Because this grant, created by this Donald Trump executive order, which was a response, the Trump administration's response to George Floyd. That's what this money is. Now, most people have not read the details of it. However, our community activists and those that are monitoring law enforcement very closely, they have read it, and they are very much against this. So much so that there have been a number of protests at different members of the Common Council's homes to make sure that these resources were not allocated. But on the surface, you have a number of people that see the uptick in crime in the city of Milwaukee and automatically default to, we need more police. That's just what the status quo thinking is. And I suppose I don't fault people for having that attitude, because you get in trouble, you need the police, right? You call the police, we want more police on the street, because what does that do? That shortens response time when we need them, correct? And so I guess it makes a lot of sense, especially if you look at the context of the crime that is taking place in the city of Milwaukee, and that crime, of course, being a detriment to quality of life, et cetera, et cetera. But there are strings attached with this money. And another thing that is necessary to do is to look at the context in which this grant was created. The Trump administration could not ignore what was happening in this country. And Trump signed this executive order on June 16th. So right in the middle of nationwide protests. In fact, that wasn't even the crescendo, the peak of protests. They were just getting warmed up. George Floyd was murdered Memorial Day weekend. I think it was right around May 25th. And so by June 16th, you're just starting to see this plethora of cities engage in these protests. And then, of course, you had the Breonna Taylor situation that was infused in these protests as well. So the Trump administration, being that this was an election year, he had to do something. But what I want to try and illustrate is that what he did to create this money didn't go far enough. And once you take money from the administration, you are beholden to the strings that are attached to it. Now, remember, the strings were created by the Trump administration, but you also have to keep in mind the rhetoric of the Trump administration about really hammering down on law and order. This is right about the time that Donald Trump had peaceful protesters in Washington, D.C., outside of the White House, tear gas and moved aside with force so Donald Trump could get a photo op at a church that he doesn't attend with a Bible that he doesn't read that was held upside down and backwards. If there is political thinking that created that moment, do we also want a federal grant that is moneyed extensions of that moment created by Donald Trump? We do not. I don't know what more we can do to convince people that more police on the streets, not properly trained, police on the streets. Is not the answer. And I may have missed some of your comments because I did things a little backwards this morning. So we'll do roll call in just a moment. But so far, good morning to Lemon Harris and to Douglas Dickerson. Lemon Harris says if they stop having to pay out millions to cover the lawsuits of the bad cops, they'd have all the money that they need. I do not disagree with that. First, it needs to be a change in law enforcement, the perception of law enforcement by the community. Do you guys think that there's a number that we can hit, a magic number of police on the street in the city of Milwaukee to where there's no homicides, to where there's no murder? See, what we're trying to do is extinguish crime after the fact. Police are not a deterrent. I think if we have an understanding of that, the more police you have on the street, it just means that crime and criminality is going to shift, because no matter how many cops you have on the street, they cannot be everywhere. They cannot respond to everything. And in some instances, is it better? Is the community better served? Is it a better use of our limited resources to send people that aren't police officers into certain crisis situations? Because some of these cops, and not all of them, they are hammers and they see us, members of the community, as nails. They don't have this unlimited repertoire of skills in which they can employ in a variety of different situations they may see. Ain't no telling what a cop may face. And there's no way, no human being could be trained and well-versed in all of the different tools, tricks, techniques, and training to deal with the things that they will see. There's no way. And so at some point, once we get over ourselves, we're going to have to look at other trained professionals that can deal with these particular situations. I mean, if somebody's having a mental health episode or really, really severe withdrawal from a controlled substance, is the answer really to murder them? Really? Everybody who is watching this broadcast has either been, knows someone, or has loved someone, or is taking care of someone who is a drug addict, who is an alcoholic, who has a whole host of other issues. And if I ask you that question, if I make it personal for you, and you think about your loved one, your spouse, your family member, your child that has been dealing with addiction issues, and they have an episode because you've seen their episodes, you may have been a victim of one of their episodes. You mean to tell me that the way we deal with that is to shoot them in the street like a dog? I mean, that is one way to extinguish the problem. But that's also the same mode of thinking that when people commit certain crimes, just put them on death row and kill them immediately. Don't waste all these taxpayer dollars allowing them to have an appeal process. It's that same mode of thinking. Melissa Garvis. Good morning, Melissa. Good morning. Today's guest for big announcement. You are new Santa, which explains the white beard. So no, Melissa, but if I was a Santa Claus, the only people that could sit on my lap would be women age 40 and older. So I don't, but I think if I was a kind of Santa where only women age 40 and older could sit on my lap, they wouldn't call me Santa Claus, they call me something else. Marcy Stutzman, can we talk about cannibal sandwiches though? No, we can't. Somebody explained it yesterday in one of the various Facebook posts where it has to do with where human beings evolved. So in Africa, and this actually makes a lot of sense. I haven't verified it, but it sounded good and it was plausible that in Africa, because of the heat and the inability to refrigerate and keep cold meat, animal flesh that people would consume, you had to cook it to kill the bacteria, right? You had to cook it. So what do people eat in Africa? A gazelle, maybe? What's another animal that we would eat? I should know this. A gazelle, an African deer, right? And you got a bow and arrow and you do a boomerang. I don't know what we use to kill an African deer in Africa. And you kill it. You got to cook it otherwise the bacteria and the hot sun, because Africa is very hot. It's a very scientific definition, I know. So you got to cook it real good so it's well done, right? But doesn't that also explain, is it stereotypical or is it cultural that African Americans don't prefer their beef rare or medium rare? We prefer it Well done. I've had this discussion before. Maybe that goes back to when we were on the plains of Africa. We had to cook our meat thoroughly because the hot sun would encourage bacterial growth. However, the white folks that evolved in colder climates way much further north of the equator, which explains the white skin because it can absorb more vitamin D and it's also very protective against frostbite. Because it was already so cold so many days out of the year because of the latitude of northern climates and those that evolved there, they didn't have to cook the meat because it stayed cold and there was ways in which they could refrigerate meat in these colder climates so they could just eat it raw. But there's just something about, I don't know if that makes any sense. I mean, reading it, it makes sense, but I don't know if we have the kind of digestive tract where we can just eat raw meat. And plus, it's just disgusting. When somebody made the comparison to eating cannibal sandwiches to people eating brains, like zombies eating brains, I was like, oh, that comparison makes sense as well. Sam Marginoff, good morning. Tammy Reed says, rolling on the floor, laughing at Melissa. It's not funny. Don't encourage her, Tammy. Loretta Cunningham, good morning to you. Curtis Cook, good morning. Vanessa G, good morning. G Collins, any chance of police officers having to carry their own, gotta read the comment, insurance for lawsuits so taxpayers won't foot the bill? No way. That's why they have a union. Nope, that's not. Nobody would be a cop. If you had to insure, if police officers did have insurance, they would take life insurance policies out on the people that they killed. No, I don't think that would ever happen. Could you imagine the political fight that we would have to go through to require police officers to have some kind of like malpractice insurance to where the taxpayers weren't on the hook? One thing we could do, but this wouldn't work either, is you could require a particular level of liability insurance when you purchase a firearm, meaning that anyone who has a firearm, whether it's a regular, Second Amendment gun owner, a concealed carry person, or a police officer, they would have to have a liability policy. So if they were found negligent use of that firearm, victims could get paid out from the insurance policy. But that would be rooted in federal law. It would be challenged at the U.S. Supreme Court, saying that it was a strike against the Second Amendment for the right to bear arms. So there's not really a whole heck of a lot we can do in that regard. But I think that there has to be a way, because there was a period of time, and I don't know what culture you have to look at or what era in American history you have to look at, where the police just weren't shooting as many people. They just weren't. They weren't. There were other factors at play, but the culture of America was also very different. There was, I would say, a substantial period of time, and maybe it was to the detriment of minority communities, where there was a level of respect afforded to the police that I don't know if that exists anymore. And I'm not saying that it should, because you have to earn the respect of a community. And if a community has had a series of negative interactions with you and those like you for a long period of time with no decisive corrective measures taken, then the community is not going to respect you. And they're going to see you as invaders. But then you can make it worse by taking away the residency requirement. So now the police do not have to live in the communities and shop in the communities and send their kids to the schools in the communities in which you police. There's a detachment. If you took an African-American young man that grew up in the city of Milwaukee in the 1990s and the 2000s, with the experiences that come with that, and he decides he wants to go in law enforcement. Remember, he lives in the city of Milwaukee. He went to, maybe North Division High School. Maybe he went to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee for college. This is where he lived for his entire adult life, in the city of Milwaukee. He decides he wants to go into law enforcement. But then he applies somewhere in Waukesha County, or maybe rural Kenosha County. He didn't grow up there. He doesn't know the people. He doesn't know the institutions of those neighborhoods and those communities in which he is policing. In fact, every day when he's done with his shift, he drives back to the city of Milwaukee, where he is surrounded by his own friends, his own family, and the culture that raised him to be the man that he is. But when he goes to work, he is dealing with the worst of the people of that community that he's policing that he doesn't know, and they don't know him either. Can you see where this is just one example of where that friction can begin to boil over between that police officer that lived and grew up somewhere else, but is policing another city in another town. Now, there's no, you know, you know, examples that we can analyze of specifically African American men who grew up in Black communities, but then go and apply for law enforcement jobs in white suburban or rural or exurban communities and just watch their careers. I don't know if there's any, major data that we can look at, but I bet you if there was, we would see a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of complaints about that police officer, right? This Black cop policing these white neighborhoods. But for the most part, we don't see that. It's either because Black police officers don't want to work in the suburbs, the exurbs, or in rural America when they're police. Either they don't want to do it or they're not allowed, meaning that they're not going to get hired. Deion James, good morning. Dorian Higgins, good morning to you as well. Maurice, Dr. B. Good morning, Dr. B. Dr. B, of course, you got to say your whole spiel, Dr. B. Repping that number one zodiac, Sagittarius, longtime listener, first time poster, good show. Thank you, Dr. B. You don't have to tell everybody you're a Sagittarius. This ain't 1978 telling people what your zodiac sign is. Lori Baumbach says, the most disgusting thing I ever tried once. My dad loved them. My mom wouldn't touch raw meat or fish, talking about cannibal sandwiches. Guys, I want to talk about the cops grant here, but I guess cannibal sandwiches, it's the holidays, and this is when people eat their raw meat, I suppose. So growing up in Brown Deer, at the time I grew up, it was just a lot of white people, but my best friend actually was Puerto Rican. I don't know how we found each other, but we did. And so I remember being a little kid, and my friends' parents would have Christmas parties, and they would just let the kids just run around. The adults are just getting incredibly drunk. We didn't quite know it at the time, but like, oh, Mr. Johnson's acting very funny and very playful all of a sudden after he's been drinking that clear liquid with lots of ice and a couple of olives in it. So we're just a bunch of kids and we're running around the party and all the adults are getting drunk. And I remember seeing cannibal sandwiches when I was like 8 years old and being thoroughly disgusted, mostly because I had never seen anything like that served in my home. And when you're 8 years old, all you know is what you've seen at home, essentially, right? And like, oh, sure, when you got to try one. I remember Mike Gomez, who actually is Puerto Rican, but has a German mother, a white mother. He would like, oh, sure, and he showed me how to make it, how you make a cannibal sandwich. I'm still disgusted. He's like, you put the raw meat on, and then you put onion and salt and pepper on the rye bread, and you eat it. I'm like, you're nuts. So as I got older, they just became a fixture at holiday parties where the person giving the party was white. It just became commonplace to me. I didn't eat them, but they always encourage you to try it. It's like this ultimate kind of peer pressure. Like, oh, sure, well, don't be afraid of it. Just try it. Just try it. Try it. And the fangs come out and they all turn into zombies. Kidding. Not really. So one year I broke down, but I was a teenager at this point. And I think it might have been a friend's Christmas party. I might have been older than a teenager. And they're all eating the raw beef. Remember, I'd seen this since I was 8 years old. And so here's what I did. I agreed. And everybody knew that Sherwin Hughes was anti-cannibal sandwich, as I still am to this day. But here's what I did. And I think I invented a new way to eat the cannibal sandwich for the African-American or for the white person that doesn't want to eat raw animal flesh. Can't believe I'm even talking about this. Do you know that if you just put, I don't know, maybe an ounce of and it's supposed to be like ground chuck or ground sirloin, like the cheap ground beef. You're not supposed to eat that raw. I guess the cut of meat makes it less deadly to give you salmonella or whatever is in meat that's bacterial. So you take about an ounce or so. Write this recipe down if you need to, or replay the video or share it. Get about an ounce of the ground, whatever. Put it on the rye bread. Do your little salt, do your little pepper, do your little raw onion. Make about 3 or 4 of them, you see. Got your rye bread, got your ground chuck, got your salt, got your pepper, got your onions, okay? Put them bitches in the microwave for 2 minutes and make little hamburgers because it cooks very quickly, you see. And I'm making these, and the white people are looking at me like, oh, what is he doing? Why is he making so many? He's never had one in his entire life, and now he's making 4 of them. Put it on a plate, put it in the microwave, and Sherwin ate little cocktail hamburgers. Problem solved. So there you go. Tammy Reed, this convo is disgusting. Let's move on. Tammy, fair enough. Thank you. All right, here's what I want to do. Because this is the discussion on policing is one that we have to continue to have. We can't just, and I think that this is a natural and normal thing for people in a democracy. We get really, really mad for an extended period of time, and then we get distracted by something else, or something else happens, or something coronavirus, and we ease up on the thing that was at the forefront of the democratic consciousness, democratic small d. And it was policing. It still is policing. In communities of color, it is always going to be policing and then literally everything else. But then what we do is we get really angry, and then the elected officials begin to respond. They have executive orders, they pass ordinances, they have press releases and press conferences. They are being reflective of this universal or seemingly universal anger that is being exhibited by the community when we are outraged by something. It's why we elect them. If we're outraged, then they need to do something to fix, to solve, or to fund a solution so there is less outrage, right? Because if there's outrage going into an election, everyone who is in office that is not mimicking and echoing that outrage with their policy, they're all going to get defeated, right? So Donald Trump had a bunch of outrage surrounding him. We had an election, Donald Trump lost. It's the easiest way to defeat somebody. Create outrage anywhere in America around any particular issue, and the first thing we'll do is look at our elected officials, because it's easy to blame them, because it's relatively simple to change leadership. We have elections all the time. Somebody's getting elected every single year in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, whether it's local, county board, whether it's school board races. And a lot of these campaigns are staggered. So every single year we have the option and opportunity to change leadership all over the place. So in the 4-year gaps between presidential races, you've got congressional races, U.S. Senate races, automatic races, et cetera. So we do have the opportunity to change leadership all of the time. So when you have an outraged community, you have elected officials that are responding to it. Fair enough, they do something, we think they're doing their jobs, but they're never doing enough of their jobs, and we move on to the next thing. Policing absolutely is one of those issues, and there was collective outrage like we have never seen before, with nationwide sustained George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, so many different names, all of these protests. So they were all compelled to do something. And Trump had to respond, because if that outrage continued, he was going to lose the election for sure in his mind. He lost anyway, but that's just how the political cycles work. People get mad, elected officials have to respond, and then we judge their response based upon how they perform at the ballot box. From Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the Milwaukee Common Council voted to reject a nearly $10 million federal grant on December 15th. That would have paid for more than 24 police officers. However, the battle to fund those positions has not finished. During a meeting Tuesday morning, the Common Council voted 9-6 not to accept $9.7 million of federal COPS grant, the Community-Oriented Policing Strategies grant. Would have paid for 30 Milwaukee police officers for 3 years. Later in the meeting, Alderwoman Nakia Dodd asked the council to reconsider the vote next month. If the decision stands, the Milwaukee Police Department would lose 150 officer positions gradually over the course of the next year, instead of the 120 already cut by Mayor Tom Barrett due to budget constraints. Council members who voted to reject the money say national discussions about policing are forcing them to make tough decisions. We are in an era where policing as we know it has to change. Can we agree on that? Do we have to, or do we not agree on that because of the people that want policing to change? That's where a lot of this back and forth is. There are people that want policing to change. Not even really sure how, like maybe less murder, maybe less excessive force, maybe less racial profiling. There's those people. And then there are the people that like how law enforcement works, and they vote for law enforcement candidates, and they vote for law enforcement and law and order judges. That is the diametric opposition in our democracy. The people that want policing to change and those that want it to stay the same or get even more forceful. Because what do some of those people say? Throw the book at them. Stop being so soft on them. Stop giving them misdemeanors and stop giving them probation. Put them in jail forever. It's amazing, though, because the people that say that, throw away the key, lock them up forever. We're too soft on them. They don't serve enough time. They need to go to jail forever when they commit these offenses. And that's a pretty common theme among some law enforcement conservatives, I will call them. Put them in jail forever. But then those are the same people that want their taxes cut. You don't get it both ways, boo-boo. You want to lock them up forever? You want to throw away the key so they never see the light of day? What do they say? Put them under the jail? Oh, that's going to cost you. It might cost you a little. Might cost you a lot, but it's going to cost you. So you don't get to do that. So that strategy is a zero-sum game. You can't want to throw away the key and lock them up forever, but then want to have your taxes low. We're going to have to raise your taxes if you want to be heavy-handed on law enforcement. So we have to be smart about it. The department said in a statement, in the event the City of Milwaukee Common Council declines the $10 million no match cops hiring program grant, the Milwaukee Police Department's sworn strength will be reduced by an additional 30 officers, resulting in a total loss of the funding of 210 officers over a 2-year period. Ultimately, the community receives the level of policing service that it and its representatives demand. The Milwaukee Police Department will continue its mission to provide first-rate services based on the resources it is allocated. We thank the countless community members, block watch captains, bid executive directors, and elected officials who have supported this grant. Let me give you another perspective because we need as many perspectives on this as we possibly can get. Reducing the number of police officers by 210 over the next 2 years. We're also eroding the power of their union. Less cops, less union power, less police officers paying union dues, the less representation that these police officers will have. And we know, we can pretend that we don't know, we know how powerful the police union is in protecting bad cops. But here's the thing about that, because it's tricky. I will say that the majority of police officers that I've interacted with in my life, and this is just me, not you, not everybody you know, the majority of the police officers that I've dealt with. I'm 45 years old, for God's sakes. I've dealt with cops in a variety of different situations since I was a kid. The majority of them have been decent, friendly, professional, some goofy, some funny, some like Barney Fife. Hello, Sherwin. Did you call us for service? I'm not kidding you. There's some cops that are just goofy chuckleheads. There's a whole, they're people. But those good cops, those funny cops, those chucklehead cops, those cops that could walk the beat in Mayberry are all contributing to the power of that union, that all too often we see that union represent the interests of bad cops. The good cops that are in the union are providing financial support to represent the bad cops when they murder members of our community. So if you erode the number of officers over time and we are forced to get smarter with the resources we allocate to law enforcement, only then can we begin to see other solutions. That sending the hammer into the situation where everybody looks like nails is ultimately not going to be the solution for long-term respectful relationships between the community and the police. If you had these unlimited budgets and we were flush with cash and the economy was doing well and people were buying properties and businesses were doing well and restaurants were doing well and a lot of people were working and a lot of people were paying sales taxes and paying income taxes and paying property taxes and paying excise taxes, and people were renting cars because there's additional ridiculous taxes when you rent a car, and people are coming to Milwaukee for the DNC because we have big conventions and they're paying that additional entertainment tax when they're getting hotel rooms. We can fund law enforcement left and right. We can give them new cars. We can give them new uniforms. We can get their badges polished. We can get them chrome-plated guns with initials on their bullets. We can do all of that stuff. But what if the money dries up? What if there's a pandemic? What if people aren't buying houses anymore. They're not renting hotel rooms anymore. What if there is no DNC? We can't count on all of that money. We still have to have law enforcement, but now we have less money to do so. We have to think of much more efficient ways. There might have been a time where you had a great job, making a bunch of money. You get laid off. You just have to get smarter with the resources that you have. Now, this looks like an easy win because it's $9.7 million allocated by the Trump administration and all of the stipulations of that money created in that executive order, which I'm going to get to in a second. Doesn't solve the problem. It does not solve the problem, especially because the grant is limited term. It's not forever. You think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would stick their necks out to renew a grant allocated by the Trump administration in which the country wanted chokeholds to be banned? There's two kinds of chokeholds. One that cuts off your air, one that cuts off blood to your brain. The Trump administration, with this executive order, which is the root of this COPS grant, only bans one chokehold. Doesn't ban chokeholds outright, which is not a heavy lift because police officers have so many other things they can do to subdue a subject. There's pepper spray and there's mace and then there's tasers. They got nightsticks. Some of them just kick you in the face. I don't know. But they can't ban a chokehold. Marlon Pitchford, good morning. Udell Harris, sorry I'm late. Good morning to you. Miss Dream Johnson, good morning. Dorinthia Robinson, why not reduce the officers? They don't seem to be reducing crime anyway. Either we attack the issue of crime, because crime is it's so multifaceted. It's not just, there's crime and there's Crime Stoppers, right? Crime is it's property crime. It's crimes against, other individuals. Sometimes there's victimless crimes. We have to look at, and this is what we don't want to do because we never want to spend any time analyzing the details of why certain communities do the things that they do. And a lot of it's because they're cut off from the resources and they are forced to be creative. And sometimes that creativity, when you're cut off from mainstream opportunities and resources, including in education, including in jobs, including in public transportation, getting from where you live to where the jobs are. And then there's the attitudes about people of a particular race that live in a certain neighborhood. I still hear it to this day. Ask somebody, black person, white person, Asian person, Native American person, whatever the person is, ask them where a bad neighborhood is. Just ask them. Hey, so-and-so person, where is a bad neighborhood in the city of Milwaukee? It's always going to be where black and brown people live. And there's an attitude reflective of that. It's like every single person, the single mothers, the families, the teachers, the firefighters that live in those neighborhoods, because you say, these cross streets or this section of town, this is a bad neighborhood. You're talking about individual people. Like everybody who lives in a neighborhood is bad. People out there barbecuing and cutting their grass and hanging out, having a lemonade on the front porch. Like these are all bad people because we still have that attitude. And that's almost universal. And so when you cut people off from the perception of living in a decent neighborhood, and the majority of the people are good in these neighborhoods, even though you may think it's bad, just like the majority of the cops are good, right? The majority of the police are wonderful people. There's a couple of bad apples. In neighborhoods, we have a couple of bad apples, but you don't deem the whole neighborhood bad because of a couple of bad apples. 6% of the people commit 60% of the crime, and we just can't seem to figure that out. 6% of the people, meaning 94 of 100 people, are not committing the crimes. 6 of them are. Dr. B says, how about those and working on body cameras? Who pays and enforces that and those? That's a more complicated issue than we realized too, because we thought, okay, they have body camera, they record everything, they film everything, they get all the audio, we can see what actually happens, instead of it being the police officer's word against the victim. And sometimes the victim is deceased and they cannot defend themselves, right? So you have to rely on the police officer's word. And we realized that that wasn't a good idea. And so there was a series of motions and ordinances set forth by the Milwaukee Common Council. I believe Alderwoman Malele Coggs was at the forefront of that. This was years ago. There was like a test pilot program where we had $750,000 we were going to allocate to body cameras. And then when I heard about it, I took it even a step further that the public should be able to routinely monitor police officers' body cameras, right? So you go to a website and you can say, officer so and so who is in this neighborhood, and you can just, because it's all public, right? Because police officers are public servants. So why not? Because this would ultimately, I thought, instill more confidence in law enforcement and in policing, because a lot of us don't see what some police officers go through. People in the community are not nice to cops, especially if they have a bad relationship with law enforcement. Cops deal with some really, now look, they signed up for it. They want to be a cop. Sometimes you have good days, sometimes you have bad days like any other job. But cops, when they have a bad day, it really sucks. Like, like I'd quit. One bad day being a police officer, I'm like, this ain't for me. So you let the public see policing. But in a lot of situations, we are dealing with really, really sensitive crimes where you have to protect the victim. If we had body cameras on all police officers and you allowed the public to view these body cameras of these police officers in real time, so we could actually see from the first person view of the perspective of the police officer what they see and what they deal with, and you get a call. About 60% of the calls that an officer is going to deal with in their career is domestic violence. 60%. So that is an issue. We have no idea how to deal with that. And I say we don't know how to deal with domestic violence because men are victims of domestic violence too. But how many men's shelter are there? And when I even begin to talk about that situation, immediately women diminish it like it doesn't exist. Oh, shut up, Sherwin. Men, they don't need that. Men can't get abused. You know what that is? That is women sounding like abusers and protecting those other abusers. Because a woman, the only entities a man, especially a black man, cannot defend himself against. And self-defense is like self-defense, self-preservation. It's in every law. It's encoded in religious doctrine. I mean, it's in the Bible. Like self-preservation is just one of those things. But an African-American man cannot defend himself against two entities, even if he's being murdered, okay? One is a police officer, the other is a woman. And so we don't know how to deal with domestic violence because it's also very multifaceted. So 60% of what an officer is going to deal with is domestic violence related, and there's almost always children involved. Remember, we have all of the body cameras in an ideal world. All the police officers are wearing body cameras, 60% of what they're going to deal with. So 6 out of 10 of their calls are going to be domestic violence related, and that officer's body camera is on. We're going to see that woman who's abused or that man. We're going to see the innocent faces of the children that are there crying. We are going to expose things that will not protect those who are innocent when you have the universal application of body cameras. And that's a really tough one. So what we do is we give the officers a level of discretion. Okay, officer, when you get to the place and you find out it's not a domestic violence incident and there aren't children, because you don't want to film children. You don't want to film children. And sometimes like people are naked. Like cops will tell you some of the things that they see are just not for public consumption. Like they'll show up and somebody's naked, and somebody's always naked. There's always somebody naked running down the street. And so we give the police officers some discretion. They get a call. The call may not be very descriptive of what exactly is going on, or what dispatch is saying might be something totally different than what is happening. Or by the time the officer gets there, the situation may have evolved into something totally different. So we give the officers discretion to be able to turn their cameras on and turn them off. But that almost makes the point moot of having body cameras in the first place, because sometimes they can get to a situation and realize there's no children, there's no innocent people that shouldn't be recorded, that shouldn't be filmed, and they just don't turn the camera on. Also, these are high stress situations. If a police officer arrives on a scene and they don't know what the scene is yet, right? And they're getting shot at, because cops get shot at. They do. Sometimes a lot. Do you think that police officer is going to say, hold on, shooter, let me get this on camera. Beep. God, hold on, everyone. Stop. Everyone, please. Stop shooting for just a moment while I beep. It's tough. Sahara Ali, how do you ensure that they keep the good cops when the worst cops have the most clout and protection? Hashtag fuck 12. You know, I think there's things that we can do to where police officers feel much more invested in the neighborhoods that they are policing. And first and foremost, I think residency requirements help. But there's good people. Like you can be a good person from Waukesha and police in the city of Milwaukee. That's very possible. But I think just over time, because we forget that when people call the police, we call them to deal with stuff that we can't. The worst of the worst, all of the time. Cops are not getting kittens out of trees. They're dealing with the worst of the worst. And so even good people that started out as officer friendly, that job will harden you. Don't believe me? Look how many cops are alcoholics. You know what the real problem is, especially because we had a kind of a surface conversation about domestic violence. Do you know how many police officers abuse their spouses? You guys have no idea. No, it is staggering. But that information is not released for a variety of reasons. Domestic violence information and details, a lot of it is very clandestine because you want to make sure the victim is not, their name is not out there in the press, et cetera, et cetera. But also, if you get a domestic violence charge, even a misdemeanor DV charge, you can't own a gun. We could eliminate a lot of the bad if we call them bad, because there's no way you can be a police officer and not have PTSD. There's no way. I could get PTSD from watching an episode of Cops. It's also very funny, some of the things that police officers deal with. But there's no way. And a lot of them drink. Over the years, I've gone to different functions with police officers before, like when they're off duty, hung out. Nobody can outdrink a firefighter, which is another conversation. But cops, police officers, they drink to excess as a part of the culture because they're trying to numb the pain of dealing with elements of society that we don't want to see. The element of society that we want either, put to death or thrown under the jail. The police officers oftentimes deal with those people first. And the amount that they drink, I've never in my life. There was I worked for, well, you guys know where I work. I worked for Mayor Baird City Hall many years ago. And then one of my bosses in the Department of Administration had a husband and had a son that were both police officers. And the son, a big cop bar in Milwaukee it's called O'Brien's. I don't know if it's a big cop bar anymore, but a lot of police officers would go to O'Brien's. O'Brien's is on Blue Mountain or Valete? It's on Valete, 50 something in Valete. And it's right over there's a police officer substation over there as well. And a lot of police officers would go there. And they'd have their Christmas parties there. And one night, one of my supervisors in the Department of Administration, her son, police officer, Milwaukee cop, got so blasted drunk at the Christmas party that these cops were having. He stood on the hood of a vehicle out parked in front of O'Brien's and then just starts discharging his service weapon. He maybe got a 3-day suspension for that. But imagine that same cop that would get that drunk, that has his gun, that feels invincible because you're protected by the public, you're protected by the community. Back the blue, we love the blue. Like sometimes that goes to these officers' heads and they think they can do anything. Imagine him when he goes home to his wife and his kids, and his wife is yelling at him because he didn't cut the grass, and he's drunk and just got finished shooting his gun while he was standing on top of a vehicle parked on the side of the road. Once we begin to see where police officers really need help, then we can start weeding out who is fit to be on the street and who needs to be on permanent desk duty. Paula Weckman, I'd be interested to know how many DV calls end up going sour/violent. A lot of them. But here's a bigger issue. Because if we're going to talk about policing and law enforcement, then let's really talk about it. If we're going to talk about it, let's discuss it. So I know an attorney that he's a defense attorney, but he makes a fair amount of his money for the year representing police officers that are involved in domestic violence. And so he has to be very resourceful, this attorney does, to make sure that these charges don't stick. Because if a police officer gets a domestic violence charge, that's it. Per state law, they cannot own a gun, can't own a gun. You can't be a cop, and that now affects the livelihood of that family. When you get some time, God, what is his name? Was it, I think his last name was, I got to remember all these names all the time. But there was a police officer who, it was on the Northwest side. It was a couple of years ago where he was known to abuse his spouse. And he was a police officer. And there had been numerous calls to this home. The wife would call the police, and guess who would show up? His coworkers, his colleagues at the precinct where he worked. And oh, you guys calm down and you go sleep at your mother's house or you go get a hotel. And there were a number of calls for service. This particular police officer, who was a known alcoholic and had some mental illness, would always abuse his wife all the time. Well, he finally killed her. She's dead now. And I think he may have killed himself as well. I don't want to say the wrong name because I'll get sued. But it was just maybe 2018, 2017, a police officer, northwest side of the city of Milwaukee, killed his wife, and I think he did kill himself. But there was a file of these repeated calls to this house where this African-American man was abusing his wife, and he ultimately killed her and then killed himself. We have to deal, if you want to talk about who the bad cops are, and maybe we need to readjust our definition of bad, some of them are suffering, but I don't know if we give them, especially men, the ability to come forward and say, I need help. Do you guys know what some women say about us when we come forward and say we need help? Some are incredibly supportive. Some will be the first ones that we call when we say we need help. But then there's everybody else. You're not a man, you're weak, suck it up. You know how detrimental and how traumatizing that is to men as well? Like, we're not allowed to be human. Fair enough. You don't want men to be human. You don't want them to cry and to express emotion. Okay, then we're going to kill everything we see. We have a choice as a society. I could go into this whole thing about how we traumatize men, but nobody cares because, you're men. It's almost like nobody cares what white people go through because, you're white. Well, we might got to look a little bit deeper. I had so much more to talk about. All right, the cops grant. From the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, the council and the nation are at a crossroads, which they must decide whether to make changes regarding policing. The Milwaukee Common Council on Tuesday morning rejected a nearly $10 million 3-year grant for 30 new cops, but it's not over. After the 9-6 vote to reject the measure, Alderwoman Nakia Dodd made a motion to reconsider. The council and nation are at a crossroads at which we must decide whether to make changes, Alderman Hamilton said. Alderman Hamilton also sought to amend the measure to include 7 conditions with which the police department would be required to comply to receive and spend the grant. However, after a long debate, he withdrew his amendment. All right. This COPS grant, community-oriented policing strategies, was created by the Trump administration in response to the protests that were happening nationally after the George Floyd murder. And it says on June 16, 2020, this is from the actual COPS Department of Justice website. On June 16, 2020, President Trump signed the executive order on safe policing for safe communities. There's a collection of resources that have been made available to law enforcement agencies, officers, and professionals in order to act in accordance with the stipulations outlined in the executive order 13929. And so one of the things, so there's a whole bunch of details of the executive order, but what it's supposed to do is ban chokeholds. They only ban one kind of chokehold, the chokehold that cuts off your air supply, not the chokehold that cuts off blood to your brain. The carotid chokehold is still legal. So because they compromised even a chokehold, don't ban them all, just ban the one that cuts off the air, not blood to the brain, and the latter can kill you as well, but it's still legal. Well, they said, well, let's throw in a whole bunch of other resources as well to mask the fact that we cannot outright ban police officers from using chokeholds, even though we give them a number of other tools to use non-lethal force. But here's the most significant part of this grant, and where the web gets very, very tangled. In order to qualify for this grant, your police agency needs a new kind of training or a new standard operating procedures on training to make sure that this particular chokehold is banned, but you can kind of quietly keep the other one. So they in every state, there are several accrediting agencies. Now remember, this is the brainchild of Donald Trump and William Barr, Attorney General William Barr. So think about their perspective on law enforcement. So they said, okay, look, we're going to respond to the George Floyd protests. We're going to kind of ban chokeholds a little bit because George Floyd was murdered with a chokehold. Okay. So we need another level of bureaucracy, a law enforcement accrediting agency to make sure that these police departments and university police officers as well, because they're also recipients of the COPS grant, to make sure they're being accredited by law enforcement agencies so they implement the correct policies in order to qualify for the grant. And then when I dug a little bit deeper, I have it here somewhere. I got so many tabs open. It's ridiculous. It's actually the background that I have. Oh, here it is. Okay. Everybody hang on. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. Like this here. And we go like that there. And we go here. Okay, guys. So the Wisconsin Law Enforcement Accreditation Group, in order to qualify for the COPS grant, there's an organization in the state of Wisconsin that accredits law enforcement to comply with the rules of this executive order. Now, the other thing about the executive order that gives a $9.7 million to the city of Milwaukee, it does not have to be used for police officers. It can be used, it's up to the discretion of the city. A whole bunch of different services, community services and social services are reasonable uses of this money, but the city of Milwaukee only sees the money as being for additional bodies on the street for police officers. There's a lot of flexibility in what this money can be used for. But here's what I think one of the looming issues is that most people who are angry that the money is being rejected don't look at. Here are the people on the governing board of the Wisconsin Law Enforcement Accreditation Group. So these are the people that review your police department, your city, your municipal cops, your sheriff's department, if sheriffs qualify, and your university and city cops. These are the people that review your policing practices in order to qualify you for the COPS grant. I want you to look at these people. The WI League President, Mark Ferguson. Okay, so these are the people. Chief of Police in Glendale. Glendale has had officer-involved shootings and Black men getting racially profiled as well. Vice President Anna Rosinski, Menominee Falls Police Department. Treasurer Bob Roche, retired police officer. Badger Sheriff's Association Secretary John Matz, sheriff for Winnebago County. Are you seeing something here with these police officers that are on the agency that accredit law enforcement so they can get this COPS grant? Do you see the necessary diversity, like the diversity that exists in communities of color? The people that are reviewing police departments' plans do not have the diversity that is reflective of a place like Milwaukee, Madison, et cetera. Don't worry, there's more. Wisconsin City/County Manager Association, Rebecca Grill, City Administrator of West Allis. Don't even get me started on West Allis. Wisconsin Chiefs of Police Association, Greg Peterson, Chief of Police, Grand Chute Police Department. Not saying that these individuals can't be good cops. It's just that what they see in law enforcement may be antiquated versus what members of the Milwaukee community may want. So the plans these individuals we're looking at right now would approve may be out of touch and out of sync and lack the progressive forward thinking that we here in the only Class A city in Wisconsin will require when it comes to law enforcement. I don't think these people are culturally equipped to review what new policing methods are supposed to be for us. I'm not reviewing their police departments. They shouldn't be reviewing mine. Wisconsin Professional Police Association. So this is a union man right here. This one right here. James Palmer, the executive director of Wisconsin Professional Police. So the executive director of the Union of the Cops is on this board here. Oh, look, there's more. Wisconsin Department of Justice, Stephanie Peterson, Training and Standards Bureau. Victims' Rights and Services, Julie Brown, Director, Crime Victims' Rights Board, Wisconsin Department of Justice. You couldn't find a single brown person, not even an Asian. Oh, there's more of them. Oh, look how many there is. FCCTV Committee, WCPA, Dennis Nacy, Chief of Police, West Milwaukee Police Department. When I was in high school, and West Milwaukee at the time was in our conference, we played them in sports. The only time, well, there was two schools that repeatedly called us and members of my football team niggers. It was Slinger High School. When we played Slinger High School, it was just everywhere. And the refs didn't do anything. I'm surprised the referees didn't call us little niggers too. But every single play, hey, you niggers, a brown deer, niggers, and niggers, constantly. But the other plays, and the first time that I heard it on the football field was when we played West Milwaukee. And then we beat them like 40-something nothing. We really beat them real bad. But then we cleared our bench and we physically beat their asses because they just wouldn't stop calling us niggers. But it was actually, and this, like, my attitude on race was formed really, really early, and it's also very, very complicated because I've seen just so many different kinds of white people. But when we played West Milwaukee, the people that are from our side, right, on the Brown Deer football team, the people that initiated beating them up, not just on the scoreboard, but also on the field, when we did a bench clearing brawl, were our white teammates. Our white teammates were like, nah, we can't let them talk like that about our black teammates because we were so dramatically outnumbered. Because if you're black and, you know, your teammates are cool, right? You play football with them and you know them very well. You practice with them, you laugh with them. We had a lot of camaraderie, but at the end of the day, we knew that they were white. And we didn't know if our white teammates would band together with these other white kids from West Milwaukee. So if you're black, you got to be really, really cautious. But when I saw our white teammates take a stand like that against racism, like, no, we're about to literally kick their asses, Sherwin. I was like, word? Well, come on then. Wisconsin District Attorneys Association, Melissa Zlavi, I don't know, Assistant DA. And then the university program, undergraduate degree, Dan Stojkovic, the Dean Professor of UW-Milwaukee. And then you have somebody who's not pictured here. College program, associate degree, Richard Cole, recruit school director, Milwaukee Area Technical College. Maybe maybe the African Americans on this committee are not pictured. Actually, no, we can find out who this person is. Richard Cole. Let's see here. Oh, wait a minute. I know a Richard Cole. Maybe he's a black person. And I say that because diversity is necessary on a board such as this. MATC Wintram 2020 Law Enforcement Academy Coordinator. Okay, hold on. Let's go to images. No, well, I don't know who the hell these people are. I see some. Oh, there's a black. Milwaukee Area Technical College alumni. How about this black? New Vision of Madison. Who is this? Whatever. I don't know. Maybe Richard Cole is the only. We can't verify. I don't know. Cities and Villages Mutual Insurance Company, Rick Balistreri, Loss Control, Wisconsin Police Association Coalition. Well, we know what the hell this is. Another union-affiliated group. At large, law enforcement, Peter Nimmer, Chief of Police of Shorewood. Oh, we know about Shorewood too, don't we? At large, board member, retired Chief Steve Kopp. So these are, now remember, this is an extension of the Trump administration. The whole creation of this accreditation panel is the brainchild of Bill Barr and Donald Trump. And so to get the $9.7 million, which we are having a very narrow view of the $9.7 million in the Kopp grant, to think it only can mean police officers on the street and not these additional services that are actually outlined in all the stipulations of the grant, I think is very narrowly focused. But if we're relying on the individuals that I just showed you to accredit the new plan of law enforcement moving forward in the days after George Floyd, I don't know if that's something that we want to participate in. Know what I'm saying, guys? I appreciate you guys. hanging out with me and listening to me rants. If you have not already done so, please like our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com, your YouTube app on your phone, because I know y'all be on your phones. Search the forum too and like the channel. That would help out tremendously. And I will be entertaining comments and on this particular subject in the forum Facebook group. If you're not a member, you should request to join so we can have these thorough, thoughtful policy discussions on issues that very well may affect all of us. I apologize if I didn't get to all of your comments. I'll get to them at some point and we'll respond accordingly. You guys have yourselves a good day. Wear a mask and also take the vaccine.